All right, let's get going. It's always nice to see the chat function already jump in right at the start of our conversation. So thanks to everybody for being here. I'm really glad to be here. And I just want to welcome everybody formally to our On the Table conversation, mental health and our Black communities. My name is James Burns, and I'm the program director for the Kennedy Forum, Illinois, and it is my privilege to have you all here. This program is made possible through Healing Illinois and the Chicago Community Trust, who have been instigating conversations around racial equity across the city and the state. I'd also like to thank Mary Garrison and our panelists, who you'll meet in just a second. And most importantly, this program is made possible because people like you are here to join us and learn and continue the conversation and to be champions for mental health and substance use disorders. So thank you all very much for that. I will take a step back in just a moment. First, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mary Garrison. Mary is an LCSW and ACSW and is a professor of social work at Millikan University, clinical supervisor and consultant with over 30 years of experience in mental health services, policy, and advocacy. She is also a board member at the Kennedy Forum, Illinois, the Good Samaritan Inn, and Webster Cantrell Youth Advocacy. On a personal note, Mary is a dear friend and colleague, and I'm thrilled for this conversation this evening. Mary, I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, James. I appreciate the introduction. Hello and welcome, everyone. And I will echo James' comment that this is made possible because you are here today. So thank you so much for joining us on this very important conversation about racial inequity in mental health in our communities. So tonight, just a little bit of housekeeping, if I may. So there's a couple ways that we can engage tonight. The first is through the chat function. And it would be great if you could put in the function your name and what organization you're from, just so we can see who we have and who's present tonight. And then there's also a Q&A function. And that's where James and myself will be monitoring those questions and be able to throughout, if we can further those questions during our conversation, and we'll also have time at the end. So please note, we'll do our very best to answer your questions and work with that. And lastly, just really important for you to know that this conversation is being recorded, and you will have the opportunity to be on the Kennedy Forum, Illinois website within a few days. So you can share this with other people who are unable to be a part of that conversation. So tonight, my panelists include three of my great colleagues who will fill you in on their bios are available on the website, and we'll give you a little bit of information in just a moment. So I'm going to ask them to briefly share their names, their credentials, and their primary role on the panel tonight. So Tamika Hall, I'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Tamika Hall. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my role on the panel is I'm a provider, mental health therapist.
Thank you, Tamika. Jerry?
Hi, good evening. I'm Jerry Douglas. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm one of the social workers at the VA clinic in Lawton, Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jerry. And Tamika Hatchett.
Hi, I'm Tamika Hatchett. I'm a newly licensed clinical social worker. I am a child welfare supervisor at Lutheran Child and Family Services in Decatur, Illinois, and my role tonight is as a client of mental health services.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's just really dig into this. Our time will go quickly. And so we'll talk for about 45 minutes here and engage in questions. But as we begin our conversation, one of the things I think that is really important to understanding mental health in our Black communities and why we must do better is addressing the stigma that is out there. We know that there's stigma related to mental health. Those of us in the field, right, have known that for a long time. And there's also stigma in the Black community regarding mental health services. And so in order to do that, I find it really helpful to hear from someone. Now we're face-to-face on Zoom, but it's really an opportunity for us to hear a perspective from someone who is access services through the mental health system or not. And so I'm going to ask Tamika Hatchett if she would kind of share her story, anything you'd like to share, Tamika, and we'll just start talking from there.
Okay, so I have been receiving mental health services since I was probably about 8 or 9. My siblings and I grew up in the child welfare system. We were what was referred to back then as wards of the state. And we got clinical services to, deal with our mom and her issues being removed from her, and just dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful therapist who did not understand us as Black people, as Black children. My grandmother, who is not Black, but is a person of color, anything that was done, it just seemed like we were judged for it. She kind of couldn't control her face when she about some of the things that we had experienced. And while it's not exclusive to the Black community, it was very exclusive to, and she just to do it. Even though this woman was wonderful, she was wonderful. Because of this initial experience. Well, when I got older, my son and I was pregnant with my daughter, and my son is having clear issues. Like, I see it, I recognize it, and I'm like, okay. When we do a lot of providers for, so my son gets a therapist who he loves and he adores, but then she leaves. And he got another one, but anything that happened, so we did like once a month, I would join in on their sessions to discuss. And any emotion that I showed, she accused me of being angry. And, I've policed myself for a very long time with, I don't want to come off as the angry Black woman. And he protects his mom. He was he didn't want to do it. This is what we need. And then she left with no warning. And his previous therapist did come back, but he wasn't willing to engage anymore. He said, what do these old about me and my life? And I understand, because as a Black woman, it's hard for me to not see somebody who looks like me and attempt to tell them my life story. The things that have happened to me, the trauma that I have endured, the trauma that my children have been through. For how important it is to have mental health services, I'm still very reluctant. And so then just imagine the people who don't have the background that I have, who don't have even some of the positive experiences that I have had, their reluctance to then get mental health treatment.
Absolutely. You definitely have insights with your education and experience on, the gaps and what's happening, but as your personal experience definitely is reflected. So, so Tamika, do you think that your son will ever, what would get your son to engage in services?
A Black male therapist, but even that, I think that his experiences have been so negative that I don't know if that would be enough. But that is like, we've talked, my son is an adult now, he's 20 years old. And, we talk extensively about like his needs in terms of mental health. And he acknowledges that he needs services, but he also he doesn't want to be judged. He wants somebody that looks like him. And unfortunately, we don't have very many.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's not enough provider gaps with provision and having enough providers, and then therefore also Black providers.
Mhm.
Tamika Hall or Jerry, can you share a little bit from your professional experience what you are hearing from Tamika Hatchett about? Are you seeing that in your practice of people coming to you and sharing their experiences?
Well, her story echoes throughout the country. I think Taraji P. Henson was going through the same exact example. She was looking for a Black therapist who could understand. She's got a website, by the way, where she's looking for more Black male therapists. 71% of the people that she have on her site right now are females. So I was thinking about that opportunity that you had with that therapist. It was almost being robbed of an opportunity for her to be educated by you, because that freezes the whole entire process when it comes to getting help. That experience right there echoes throughout our community.
Very much so. And when that stops, then we don't see that further progression. I just noted in the chat that I think it said 2% of psychiatrists and 4% of psychologists only are Black. And so we're talking about also the need for not only obviously the therapist, but the people surrounding, right, that are providing that team of treatment is really essential as well.
And I just add to that, coming from child welfare, working the past 4 years, just in dealing with that, children in the system, in foster care, dealing with Black families, it's hard, you know, coming on as a Black investigator for DCFS, and you know, they've got someone knocking at the door now, and they open it up and there's this Black woman, and I said, oh, so they're sending you here now. So that opened my eyes to some of the experiences, and then hearing some of the stories that the families had, and some of the children. So it's different when they see someone that looks like them. You know, there's barriers and walls that I have to work through even then because of their past experiences, trying to figure out, okay, who is this Black woman? You know, whose side is she on, basically? So that was different. And then where I'm currently working, just being a therapist there, and the population that I serve, seeing now a Black therapist is like, oh, wow. So there are Black therapists here. So I think that was a significant barrier for individuals wanting to engage in therapy, the Black individuals, not seeing somebody that looks like them, not really feeling comfortable to talk to someone else, because like Tamika stated, you know, a white person or another race of person won't understand, you know, where I am, what I've gone through. I don't want to be judged or looked at, you know, like I've done something wrong. I'm an angry Black man, angry Black woman. But they just want to have someone that, okay, they can feel comfortable talking to and really willing to open up and share what's going on.
Absolutely.
Do we really know what's out there as far as therapist services?
Across the nation, Illinois, I mean, I think we don't. I mean, I just, with Tamika earlier today, we just had a quick conversation about trying to find a therapist, needing to find for someone a Black therapist. And so I don't know that we have those resources to know, and linkages to know that. And so I think that's a really good question of understanding, how do we make referrals, or how do we get individuals who are needing services? Because what I wonder if happens is someone's requesting it and then we're like, well, we don't know, we got to do some work on it. And one of the things that I know we talked about earlier last week was this idea of, let's do it now. When someone's ready, we need to have someone available and ready now. Our mental health system already sets people behind. Oh, we can assess you in 3 weeks. Oh, you can come in, we'll get you in, and then 4 weeks later you can have an appointment. Then you couple that with trying to find a particular therapist, in this case, a Black therapist who looks like the client seeking services, that could push that out a lot longer. And so I think that's really important in terms of providers trying to find where our resources are.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reading in the chat, in order to get more therapists of color, the stigma must be addressed. And so there's a website called therapyforblackgirls.com. And so there, I think that's true. And so we talk about that stigma that we need to reduce. And how do you think we can begin to make this change in our system of this, having providers who are Black, and then engaging individuals, even when you have a provider that is Black, that looks like the person seeking services, to go seek services? What are some things that we need to be doing as a system?
So I remember being in grad school and having a conversation with my best friend about the lack of Black people in our program, in our social work program. And one of the things I said to her, and it's the truth, Mary, until I got to Millikan, I thought all social workers did was take kids. So understanding what a social worker is to get them in these programs to then become therapists, but also getting rid of the stigma of therapy. Like, therapy is not a bad thing. It needs to be as normalized as going to the doctor when you have a stomach ache. Mm-hmm. So until we're able to do that, the stigma is going to continue.
Mm-hmm. And if you finally go and then your experience is bad, like your son's, then we're done, and that spreads, and he's telling other people that he's not going to come. You know, one of the things I heard you say, Tamika, when you shared your story, is you talked about how the first counselor was really kind and wonderful, but she didn't understand me. The second one was really kind and wonderful. And that's very kind of you to say, right? I'm sure there was a good person, but what's the role, or what do we need to do so that we just don't say it's okay that they're kind and wonderful, but they don't understand me? Because I don't think that's acceptable, right? You're not getting the provision of service that is needed.
And so I absolutely agree. And it's being comfortable confronting that. Like, wow, you are great. You're wonderful. You're not meeting my needs, and being comfortable saying that, but also the therapist being comfortable hearing that. Instead of taking it as a personal attack. I don't know everything. You can go through 700 cultural competency trainings, and that does not mean that you understand who I am as a Black person and what I deal with as a Black person in America. And so I think that that's one of the ways, like just addressing it head on, not being afraid to say it, but also counselors accepting it for what it is. It's not a personal attack. It is the truth. It is the life that we are living. You don't understand my life as a Black person. And I've shared this with you before, that I have had one more recently, one of my most recent counselors who acknowledged, hey, this is what you're dealing with as a Black woman in America in this climate right now. And this is, when we had this conversation, it was surrounding, George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and just acknowledging that I don't know what you are dealing with as a Black person. And, your experiences, that like, we don't experience everything the same way because of our race, and just being comfortable acknowledging that and not being defensive about it, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. That takes me to my current position, working with veterans. And coming into this role, I have veterans in my family, 3 generations, but I didn't hear a lot of stories. Grandfather was in Korean War. I didn't hear a lot of stories, what they experienced. So when I work with my population, sometimes I have some that may be hesitant to talk to me about their experiences because they feel I won't understand. So when I'm encountered with someone that feels like, I don't know if I really can talk about this with you because you've never experienced this, you never went to war, you never did this. My take is, you're right. I've never gone to war. I've never been in the military, but I'm willing to listen. If you will tell me about your experience, share it with me, and let me learn from you. You educate me about what you've experienced, how it feels, what's the, existing trauma, what am I trying to say? What's still going on? What are some of the things that you're still suffering from that? Or is it PTSD? Is it, the flashbacks, depression, anxiety, help educate me about your experience so I can get a better understanding of what it is that you've encountered. I may not have went to war, I may not have been a veteran, but I definitely know what it feels like to lose someone dying. I definitely understand what it feels like to be lonely. I definitely understand depression. I understand anxiety, but I may not know it the way that you know it, how you got it, but I understand it from my perspective. So it's being able to, for other social workers, white social workers, just to be able to put yourself in a seat of saying, okay, like Tamika Hatchett, okay, I don't know your experience. I'm not a Black woman, but educate me, talk to me, fill me in on your life, and just be willing to be a student of that client and listen to them.
And I think that's such a valuable point. And so we talk about this idea of cultural humility, right? Like we can learn things. Cultural competence is kind of moving. We talk about it a lot, and you need to have knowledge, but it's the humility of understanding the individual sitting in front of you and their experience and allowing them to tell you their experience, right? And so, and them educating you that way, I think is really important, because I can't tell you your experience. One of the questions I see, oh, Jerry, go ahead.
So, one of the dynamics we've had over the past year with COVID, at the VA clinic, we stopped in-person sessions. So what happened is that we did most of our sessions over the phone. And I had this young Black lady on the phone, and she was saying, I said, well, we're starting to lift some of these restrictions. Would you want to come into the clinic? Would you like to do a video, or would you prefer to do it on the phone? She says, well, I would prefer to do it on the phone because I don't want you to give this image as me being a crazy Black woman. So this dynamic of being seen as a crazy Black woman, it doesn't make a difference if you're Tamika Hatchett or if you're Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When that's the response you get, that clearly sees.
Yeah, and I thought about the humiliation, the shame, and the embarrassment. And I think about when they already thinking like that, when they come into our clinic, they are more than likely going to be misdiagnosed. Mm-hmm. And then they're not going to be able to get what they need. So when it comes to coming to therapy, what is it you actually need? What is it you're coming from? Are you a self-referral, or are you mandated by a state agency, the court systems? Like when people do a self-referral, there's a time element. We've got to get to them with that. My clock is 2 to 3 weeks. If it's beyond 2 to 3 weeks, people start to feel a little bit better and where they drop off.
Yep.
And that's a system issue. And I think that we can do better.
Right. And it all comes together in terms of how all those issues within the system, within stigma, end up creating the appropriate services and lack of access.
And if we're not careful, we'll victimize them.
You want to expand a little bit upon that?
Well, just imagine though, like for example, we have I think a lot of this starts with the insurance game. This is a very expensive game if you're not careful. The Medicare, Medicaid system versus insurance. People leave facilities based on pay sometimes. There is a minimum wage dynamic, by the way, too. A lot of us start off in community mental health, then we move on to private practice or to a hospital setting. Some of that's just based on pay. And I do understand that we all want upward mobility and we want the American dream as well.
But what it does is it leaves the access to services for those providers. If you're going to community mental health center, potentially that there's not then access to potentially a Black therapist if they're moving up and going.
Oh, and also it's like you go back there, oh no, he doesn't work here anymore, he's gone. Where you have 3 or 4 sessions, oh, she doesn't work here anymore, she's gone. And it doesn't make a difference if you're working for community mental health or you're working for the VA. It's the same dynamic, but people leave those agencies for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that and people just leaving, right? Like your son, just all of a sudden they're not there. So that abandonment that sounds like occurred to him.
It impacts his trust with the therapist, the trust that was already shaky based on other factors. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's a question that I have that says, how can the role of the church and pastors assist in this need and advocate for an increase in therapists that are African American? So let's talk about the role of the church a bit in terms of how we can work together to encourage Black churches in particular to have people access the mental health system and therapy.
That's a really, really good question. I'm glad somebody put that out there. I had an encounter with someone that's a believer, and they dealing with some things for years and going to the Black, going to church, and they were, faith was their thing, faith, prayer, and that was their belief, to get their healing, get their deliverance from what it was that they were dealing with. In years, they kept going through, but they finally came to a point and said, hey, I think I might need to try something a little different. And they actually went to go see a therapist. And that put together the pieces for them, along with their spiritual, their faith and their prayer, having that therapist. I believe that the role of the church, the pastors, to encourage and let their congregation know we don't always have to be strong. Because I think that religion piece of it is, we rely on that so much. That's where the strength is. Come on, sister. Come on, brother. But sometimes, we need a little extra help, to talk to someone, maybe on a weekly basis or whatever, to deal with some things that we have going on. And I've seen recently, and I'll just say, my pastor's going to school to get his psychology. He's going to be get his PhD in psychology, which is awesome. Sat in a sermon one day. I felt like I was in a therapy session. I mean, he dealt with depression, anxiety, so many things. We even sat there and did a mindfulness meditation exercise during the service. So if we could get more leaders to know, hey, we need to invest more in mental health. People are going through mentally, and they need to be able to sit down and talk to somebody and get some additional help. And even the thought of medication, letting our Black men and women know it's okay if you have to take some medication to help you. Not saying, okay, I just got to be on this medication, but it can be a tool to help and assist. Just like if you got diabetes, you're going to take some insulin. You're going to take your metformin. Right. You're going to take that. And if you got some chemical imbalance going on that's affecting your mental health, hey, it's okay for that as well. But it's okay to open up and talk to someone and get that pressure off of you. So just letting our pastors know, let's share this message to the congregation. And even encourage the congregants, even the students that's in college, hey, let's consider, going into mental health.
Right. So that's largely been my experience with people who are religious, who belong to a church, is that they feel like, oh, I spoke with my pastor, so I don't need therapy. And that's not always the case. Sometimes that's enough, but not always. And just normalizing it, I think, like Tamika said, in Black churches, to go and seek outside help. That would be super helpful.
So one of the things a question that came in is kind of the wondering of, quote, what in the meantime can we do, right? So we're saying there's a lack of providers. We're saying that we don't have enough Black providers in our communities. So what do we do today since it's not available? So how we can begin to build up, right? And as we talk about, get providers coming forth and entering grad school and getting their credentials, becoming psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. What do we do for those individuals right now who have no access to a Black provider and really want one and are in need of assistance? Tough question.
Yeah, it is. It is a tough question. Depends on your location too, as well. I'm in Lawton, Oklahoma, and in my clinic, guess what? Jerry's the only Black social worker. What's it like for you guys in Decatur, Tamika?
I'm the only Black social worker. We have a Black psychologist now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's tough. Even when I was younger, I was still the only Black clinician. When I was at St. Mary's, there was two of us, and it depends on the part of the country. I think that would be a different issue in Atlanta, and I'm pretty sure Chicago probably has a little bit more too as well. I'm thinking about when we look at sports teams, for example, if the Lakers can go out and recruit LeBron James, and a few other basketball players, I think we could still do it in this field too as well. It depends on if we really want to, because one of the dynamics in this field is that we can actually do better. Because I think that most of the agencies that are out there in the community, they have boards, they have HR who can invest into those things. In the 70s, they wanted more male teachers, and they were able to recruit math teachers. So I think we can, if we worked a little bit harder and we laid it on the line, this field of social work can transform America.
Well, and social workers provide the largest level of mental health services in the country at the level that we do. And that's the piece, right? And so, Tamika Hatchett, I'll go back to you, the person you saw most recently, why that worked sounded like she was willing to say, I don't know what your experience was. And so what can we do with our current providers to help them be able to understand that?
That's a hard question, because honestly, I don't think that any amount of training can really teach. It's a hard question. I do not know. If I knew the answer, I have dished it out to 100 different social workers that I've come across in the last year or two, right? I think that like my most recent counselor did, acknowledging not just that she doesn't understand my experiences as a Black person, but also that my experience is different than other Black people, right?
Absolutely.
Not assuming that you know what I go through because, oh, you have a Black cousin or a Black friend. That doesn't mean that you know who I am and what my experiences were. We've had this conversation before about how different it is in Chicago versus Decatur, and we're all in Illinois. Just really acknowledging and accepting and not becoming defensive about the fact that you don't know. And that it's okay to not know. It's okay to not know, but being open and honest about that instead of trying to label me. Because you don't know exactly how I'm feeling or what I'm going through.
I think there's this dynamic sometimes of, I don't want to mess up as a clinician. I don't want to do harm, but yet you actually do harm if I don't acknowledge that. So it is about humility to say, let's talk right here. Here's what I don't know. And can we work through this therapeutic relationship, and would this be helpful?
Mary, and I'll just say for, the social workers to be willing to learn. When you have a Black person come in, no prejudgments, even off of historical information. We all have a past, we all have a history, but give me a fair chance when I come in your office and sit in your chair. Don't just judge me by some of the things you may read in my chart, some of my old notes, but treat me for where I am now, and be willing to be open-minded, about my experiences, my life, and learn from that person and really develop that therapeutic relationship. Because when that, person comes in, it doesn't matter. I think when you're sick and you need to go to the emergency room, I don't care if the ER doctor is Black, white, Asian, Hispanic. If I'm sick, I need some help right now, but being able to understand, if you don't understand me, take the time, be willing to sit back and let me educate you about myself and my experiences, even my culture.
And that takes time. That's developed, like you said, rapport, that trust that needs to be developed. And using that level of trust to move forward. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Mary, and I'll just add, myself, I went to therapy for the first time like a year ago. Never in my life have I ever thought that I would go to therapy. Hey, I'm a therapist. Why do I need to go see a therapist? I can help myself. I know how to do coping strategies and, you know, all that. But I had a colleague that told me, Tamika, you really need to go. If you've never had therapy yourself, you really need to go and try it for yourself. I found a white man for a therapist. The day that I went, my anxiety was through the roof. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to go talk to somebody and put my business out here and, you know, expose myself. And it was such an uncomfortable feeling because myself and part of my culture, I'm strong. I'm the strong one. I'm the one that everybody comes to. You know, I'm not weak. And that's one of those barriers that, you know, African Americans that we have sometimes. We're strong, you know. When we look back historically, what we went through, that's where this mindset comes from. But I'm going to tell you, sitting in that room and meeting this man, you know, I think before I could even say hello, tears were falling from my eyes. And it was such a wonderful experience with him. And I'm glad that I did it. You know, I got over my fear. I think I had a fear. I'm like, how can I have a fear? This is what I do. This is who I am. But it was such a rewarding experience. It was very rewarding, and it was good to be able to get my stuff off and share it with somebody else.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's incredibly important also that individuals, maybe if you share, you know, if you choose to share and disclose that with a client potentially or people later, it's going to be really important, right? That there can be providers that individuals in the Black community can benefit from. Mm-hmm. And that's, we know that, but we also know that there's a lot of inequity that's happening.
Sure. And some of that inequity is that there's a city in central Illinois that doesn't have involuntary admissions to their psych unit anymore. I was kind of disheartened when I heard that. And I thought about one of my colleagues was telling me that half the people that they evaluate in the Macon County Jail are Black. So Macon County no longer has an involuntary psychiatric care program. So first of all, Blacks are landing in the corrections and jail at rates of anyway. So when we don't have an inpatient unit, Blacks are going to end up in prison anyway. So that's an ongoing community need that when I left Decatur 3 years ago, it slipped my mind. And when I talked to one of my colleagues not long ago, and he said that that's still the case. And I'm thinking about all the Blacks who are just washed away. So that's a community-based need. And the only problem with that is just that when Decatur doesn't address that and they try to send those people to another community, those community don't want to admit them because they don't want to take on a problem that Decatur doesn't want to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Right, moving someone to another community, saying, hey, we'll put you here. We need services within our community, right? Each community does. They have a right to having those services available to them.
That's only if all lives matter.
So one of the things I'm seeing in the questions are I'm talking about children in our schools and individuals being in the you know, like, so Black youth being in predominantly white schools, or again, that can translate to even maybe not so predominantly, but we know, again, there's inequity there. What do we need to be doing in our schools? What are we seeing?
So what I'm seeing in my work, so I work with abused and neglected children, is that any behavioral issue is automatically behavioral. They don't take into account anything that they have gone through, and then they're disciplining without understanding what they have gone, like the traumas that they have endured. We have kids who have, like, they were abused the first 10 years of their life, and then, okay, so they hit somebody in class. Okay, so that's not okay, but that also doesn't mean kick them out of class. Supporting them and understanding that they do have these traumas and that all behavior has meaning. Children don't act out for no reason. And when we treat them like they do, they fall through the cracks. This is when we see them in prison or in the psychiatric units or whatever when they get older, because it wasn't caught when they were younger.
And again, that misdiagnosis, the potentially of all of that, right? That's very damaging if we don't start young on appropriately engaging and providing services that are very much needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm married. That is so true. I think that's where we break the stigma, when we start really with the younger generation, letting our children, our grandchildren know. Let's stop telling them big boys don't cry, big girls don't cry. Yes, right. They do. They hurt. They have feelings. It's okay to cry. Let's ask questions. Why are you crying? What happened? So therefore, now we're teaching our children, let's talk about your emotions. Let's talk about how you're feeling. What happened? Who said what? Who did what? Let's just tell them, no, stop talking, wipe those tears, dry them up. And no, let's take time, set those babies down, and let's talk to them. Let's hear their voice. Let's let them know that they're important. And when they get older and they, become an adult and they've gone through, a thing or two, hey, I've always been able to open up and talk. Maybe the mindset's now, let me go talk to somebody. It's easy. It's not foreign, So it's right there with our parents and our grandparents, those that are responsible for raising our children. Let's encourage them to talk. Let's let them know it's okay.
Absolutely. I think it does start younger. And, I know I'm seeing some of the chat conversation about that social workers in the schools, so yes, we have some, but what are their real roles? What's happening? How different it is among districts, among, the United States. There's a huge shortage of social workers in schools, and starting there. And we tend to be, I feel in terms of just our system of mental health, we tend to be reactive instead of preventative, right? And so that's really hard. And I don't think it's the social workers or the people providing mental health that are trying to be reactive. It's the system that doesn't allow them to be proactive in terms of providing those services that are very much needed. So let's talk about when we look at developing, so we've talked about starting young in the schools, developing that trust and rapport that we really need to see begin to happen. What do we think would be, a key? We talk about stigma and we know it's there, but again, what does that look like? How do we juice it? How do we take those steps? Because we can talk a lot about this, right? That we want to do it. How do we really move forward to making sure we get to this, to shrinking that inequity and that inequality, racial inequality, and really start to have services? What are your thoughts? Because we kind of preach to the choir, right? We talk to each other as colleagues. What do we need to be telling the people who run the VA, the people who run social service agencies, child welfare agencies?
So I think one of the main things is calling it out when you see it and not ignoring it. It's something that I'm experiencing currently, that when there is clear cut bias from a therapist based on race, that we call it out. Please stop ignoring it. We do it way too much. I've found myself doing it and then it kills me inside. Just to see the things that are happening, and then I tone police myself so that I'm not the angry Black woman, right? But really getting over that ourselves and just feeling comfortable saying that, hey, this is not okay and this is how we need to address it. And I guess it depends on the agency that you're with or what type of services you're providing, what that would look like exactly. But basically having clear-cut guidelines on how we're going to treat people and sticking to that so many places that I've been, they don't do that.
Well, each community can brainstorm because the community here in Lawton's a little bit different than Decatur in some ways. We have I think we may have one Black male social worker in our system here. The other thing too is we still need to educate teachers too, by the way. Just imagine, we were talking to Tamika earlier about her experience of being misdiagnosed by a professional. So just imagine what the kids in our school systems go through on a daily basis. And another thing too that Tamika had mentioned earlier about medication. Medications is a difference maker, because I think that when we think of Black people, we think of Black people as I think one of the most underdiagnosed people in the world, because of slavery, racism, Jim Crow, and those traditional history trauma things such as Tulsa, Oklahoma. Those things are very, very painful. Those are agonizing and painful things that some of us we never get over. And we do need to be treated, because one of the dynamics of our Black pain, it shows up in our prison system. And then all of a sudden it shows up in our children, and our children are acting out in schools. But that dynamic of school, kids who don't do well in school end up in our detention system.
And we know that Cook County and LA County are the largest, mental health institutions that we have. And they're not mental health institutions. They should not be. So I have a question in the chat, in the Q&A. Do the panelists think white therapists sufficiently understand their whiteness to appreciate the nuance of Black identity and related issues of Blackness in the communities they serve? Is there room for further education, training, and engagement of providers to address the concerns and issues of the BIPOC communities? So, big question. Thinking, do white therapists sufficiently understand their whiteness to appreciate the nuance? What's the perspective on that?
I think that some do and more can, but what I've experienced is that not very many do. I think that it's possible though. I think more than just training, because you can train somebody 100 different times and it's not going to change how they innately see the world. But somebody who wants, somebody who is open to change, who's open to learning, who has cultural humility, who understands that their way is not always the right way, and that sometimes they're wrong, right? I think that it's possible. But I also think that white therapists need to want to do that. And not just because your organization says that you should, or because the NASW says that you should, or because Mary or Tamika or Jerry say that you should. It's because you genuinely want to learn of your biases and your prejudices and change them.
Right.
So I think it's possible.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tamika. Those biases. Therapy, you have to be aware of your biases. You gotta put that spotlight on yourself sometimes and take your inventory and see what's really there. Because there are biases there. It doesn't matter how many Black friends you got, if you're married into a Black family or anything like that, there can still be some biases. And you have to own that. And once you can own those biases, then that change can happen. And understand that there's a difference. A Black woman is different from a white woman. A Black man is different from a Black man. We have experienced total different things in life. And being able to see those differences, accept those differences, and then don't try to explain away. If I come in and I tell you that I was mistreated, someone was a microaggression happened, don't try to explain that away. listen to me, hear my story, validate me, validate my feelings. This is how now you can start developing that relationship with me. Don't try to explain away my emotions or my experience. Hear it, sit in it with me. You know, when it's uncomfortable, sit there with me in that.
And I think that's super important, sitting with me when it's uncomfortable for you. Because if it's uncomfortable for you, how do you think it feels for me, being the person that is experiencing it?
Well, guess what? You know, we never stop being Black, by the way. I just wanted to let you guys know that. No matter, the world is still happening around us. You know, we're not monolithic. We're not all the same. But during the George Floyd situation, we are the same. That's very deep, very painful. It bothers me on many different levels when I hear people mention the fentanyl. It says, no, that was his knee on his neck. We have to be able to call things the way they really are. So that's how we're going to heal. You can't say it's fentanyl or the guy had heart problems. No. And personally, I call that out on a regular basis.
And it's so important. And it takes a lot of work to continue to do this, right? To continue to call it out, to continue to have those conversations. And it's nothing. We have to call our colleagues, call ourselves, and be okay with being called out on that and learn to grow. And I'll go back to Tamika Hatchett. You said, you know, you got to be willing to, not because somebody told you had to, you need to be willing. And I really like that, sitting in it with the individual. And the other thing that came to mind from some of what you shared, Tamika, is the idea of, you know, labeling your emotions, that I could tell you what, you know, that you're an angry Black woman, you know, that's, I need you to, if you're angry, but I'd like you to tell me what that is and what that looks like, and not do that for you. And it's unfortunately, because people don't speak up, that I think we have that happening from some of our providers. They think they're doing good, but they're harming, and then someone's not going to come back. And that's a negative experience. So we're at about close to 7 minutes left. And I'm just looking here. There's a question of, is the medical model the best way to get real mental health support to Blacks in low resource marginalized communities? So looking at that medical model as opposed to, right, so when we're talking about the idea of oh, I need to go speak to someone because, you know, I'm struggling, or I don't want to be labeled as crazy. How do we use, you know, getting to low resourced marginalized communities? How do we get mental health in those communities? Is through that medical model the best way? Working through, you know, general practitioners who are going to help connect, you know, through places that, I think of our local area, we have behavioral health and physical health at our federally qualified health clinic. And so there's a link there that someone can be seen for their physical health, and then a direct referral can be made within that system. What do you think of that?
I think that it depends. Oh, go ahead. Go to me.
I was going to say, I actually think that is something that works really well. Because sometimes they may not come to me to deal with the mental health directly, but they may go to the doctor because of a pain or things like that. And when the Black person goes to the doctor should be doing some type of assessment with them. I'm asking some questions. I'm going to think about when my boys go see their pediatrician, and I sit in there, he's asking them, are you depressed? Have you thought about killing yourself? Are you using drugs? He asks them a whole array of questions. And if they say, yeah, I'm depressed, or yeah, I'm suicidal, okay, this is the flag. Now I can make a referral. I want to, you know, talk to this person over here. I want you to go see Jerry. I want you to go talk to Tamika. I think you would benefit from this, you know, additional service, additional help. So yeah, that is an excellent way to get, you know, our Black community members into mental health through that referral from their primary care provider.
And so while I think that it is a great way, it also depends on where you're at. So again, thinking locally, we can get to see, we get mental health services, we can at least a doctor, but then how long is that going to take? And we talked about this earlier about striking while the iron is hot. Like if we have to wait 6 weeks, well, then the person doesn't want to do that anymore. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that the medical model is not always the best answer.
Absolutely. Right.
I prefer the ecological model, the biopsychosocial, because I think that there are many aspects. By the way, in the you mentioned Black community and Black people, we got to deal with heart disease. We're going to have to deal with diabetes. And it's hard to get on top of those things if you're not feeling good, because we have an intimate relationship with food.
And you make such an important point about that, we have to understand the physical needs, right? And that why someone might not be getting those addressed if they're having some mental health concerns as well, right? So, it's it just continues to impact. And, our head is connected to our body, it's all one piece. And so being able to do that, I think is really essential. All right. So there was a couple comments that I saw talking about, again, the peer support methods based on mothers, quote, it's called Mothers in Communities, again, based on churches. And I think, Tamika, you talked about how, your pastor, look what your pastor's doing. If we can get ourselves into communities, any therapist, and begin to create those relationships and have those conversations and align with our colleagues to say, what can we do? Because we're not instantly, obviously, going to get enough providers to be able to meet the need of the Black community. So we have to work to fill the gap, which means working together.
Right, absolutely.
Let's see here. There's another question. Can Jerry or Tamika go into what the stigma looks like? And we have about another minute or so. So when you think about stigma, I guess any of you, from the provider standpoint or from the personal standpoint, it looks like they want you to elaborate a little bit more.
Well, I'll take 30 seconds of it. One of the dynamics of the stigma is a sign of weakness, by the way. That will scare most of it. By the way, we learned to do certain things on our own for a while too, by the way, too. The other big piece of the stigma is the C word. I don't want to be crazy.
Yeah.
Within that first couple of minutes, if somebody comes to my office, oh, Jerry, by the way, I'm not crazy. I said, how about you just going through a few things right now, okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think Jerry hit that on the head. The sign of weakness of that, I got some extra stuff going on. I'm dealing with depression, anxiety, bipolar, whatever. I'm dealing with some stuff. So if I need to go talk to somebody, I'm weak because I've been taught all my life, you're strong, you're big boy, girl, you got this. You're okay, pull it together. So needing to talk to someone, man, that must mean I'm weak. If I can't handle myself and keep myself together, I'm weak. And being, like you said, that C word, but also distrust, I think is probably one of those biggest stigmas, is just that distrust of thinking, when we look back historically about medical treatment, medical experiments that Black people were used in, women uteruses and all this stuff was happening, the syphilis experiment. I mean, when we look at those things that Black people have encountered or endured in the name of medical experimentation or improving medical treatment or whatever, now I'm a little hesitant now, because I have those things in the back of my mind. So that distrust, I think that's a very significant thing there. Distrust is a big.
And we need to recognize that and honor that, right? Honor that distrust that is there. Gather that. and let them move forward and gain that trust.
Yep.
We have hit our time. That hour went really, really quickly. I want to thank all of you for being here and joining us tonight, and Jerry and Tamika for being amazing colleagues and engaging in this conversation and helping to move this forward, and hopefully we can get some gaps filled here. This will be on the Kennedy Forum Illinois website as a recording, so people can go check that out and send it to other people, encourage other people to go there. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone and wish you all well.
Thank you.
Thank you.